Welcome to the Dark Stream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. The live chat is rolling. Audio and video are reported good. Unauthorized chat is also rolling. And super chats are live for those of you who are inclined to contribute to the channel. So, interesting day today. Fascinating day, really. I've never been someone who spent much time thinking about the moon landings, the space program. I was there in high school and watched when Challenger blew up. And I've been to the Smithsonian Air Space Museum, seen the Apollo stuff that's there. And, I'd always assumed that, things were as they'd been reported, that NASA had gone to the moon, whatever it was, 6 times. I read The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. Very much liked it. Also enjoyed the movie, The Right Stuff. One of the few cases where the movie is very nearly as good as the book. And the book was quite good. I always had a bit of felt like a bit of a personal connection to the test pilot community because my uncle was a test pilot at Patuxent River. I think that's the name of it, the base. And it just really wasn't something that I really thought very much about. And I had a few questions from time to time. I did think it was a little strange that they never went back. But I accepted the basic reasoning that they hadn't gone back because it's just a bunch of rocks and dust, a lifeless, not planet, but a lifeless space object. There wasn't any need to go back. The first time I ever had any real doubts about the official moon landing narrative was the second time, not the first time, but the second time that a purported moon rock, a rock that had been a gift from NASA, was tested and turned out to be petrified wood. It wasn't even a rock. The first time it happened, I thought, oh, well, that's funny. Obviously, there was a mistake. Maybe the moon rocks are too precious to actually give out. Maybe they give out fake moon rocks, right? But the second time it happened, I thought, okay, that's a pattern, And from what I understand, it's happened a few more times since. But I'm not, believe it or not, a natural skeptic. I'm not someone who is a natural contrarian either. I think about the things I think about. I don't think about the things I don't think about. I mean, just like I never questioned Jordan Peterson's intelligence for the first what year, 18 months that he was becoming the world's leading public intellectual. I made one post in reference to him that just sort of assumed that he was this smart guy. But I hadn't read anything, I hadn't seen anything. I just heard about him. My natural assumption is when I hear something, I assume that it's probably true unless there's some evidence to believe otherwise. That's my natural tendency. Now, obviously, my natural tendency has been modified by a intrinsically skeptical perspective, but that's learned. That's why I've said never trust anything the media reports. The only thing that you can be absolutely certain is not true in every detail is the official story. The official story that is put forth by the government and by the media is always 100% of the time at least somewhat false. Sometimes it's just a minor petty detail. Sometimes it's the entire thing. It's just a big fat lie. But that's a learned behavior, and I mention this just because it's understandable that some people might say, people have only gotten to know me over the past couple of years, might say, oh well, you're just a skeptic. I mean, look at you. You don't believe in evolution. You don't believe in neo-Keynesian, Samuelsonian economics. You don't believe in a lot of things. Well, that's true, but it's not a natural automatic stance. It's because I know enough about those things to know that they are false. I can mathematically prove that evolution by natural selection has not happened. It's flat out impossible, because genes do not and cannot and have never fixated within the time frames given. And so that's the perspective that I bring to the table when it comes to the moon landing stuff, right? And the thing is, it is now entirely obvious that the whole moon landing narrative is totally and utterly and completely false. We don't know exactly how it's false. We don't know if they really went to the moon with some secret technology that we don't know anything about and they just fake this crude stuff to make it look good. We don't know if they just never went at all and this was all faked to make it look like it was. But the interesting thing is that one of a lot of people have brought up problems and anomalies, whether it's the fake moon rocks, whether it's the camera panning when the lander goes, blasts off from the moon. There's camera lenses and lens flare, and there's a cottage industry of both criticism and defense of the narrative. But beyond that, there's been this logical defense, which frankly I always thought was fairly compelling, which was, if the US faked it, the Russians would have known. This has been, I remember people saying that back when I was in high school. It can't possibly have been faked because the Russians would have known and they would have said something. So that's why it was really fascinating today to read this piece which the former head of Russia's Roscosmos space agency, Dmitry Rogozin, has expressed doubt that the U.S. Apollo 11 mission really landed on the moon in 1969, saying he has yet to see conclusive proof. So this is not a nobody. This is the former head of the Russian space agency. In a post on his Telegram channel on Sunday, Rogozin said he began his personal quest for the truth about 10 years ago when he was still working in the Russian government, and that he grew skeptical about whether the Americans had actually set foot on the moon when he compared how exhausted Soviet cosmonauts looked upon returning from their flights and how seemingly unaffected the Apollo 11 crew was by contrast. This is where these are the kind of anomalies that you need to pay close attention to, because that's what points you to the truth. When you see these little anomalies that make you go, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't seem quite right. Rogozin said he sent requests for evidence to Roscosmos at the time. All he received in response was a book featuring Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov's account of how he talked to the American astronauts and how they told him they'd been on the moon. Okay, so the only evidence you've been provided is a secondhand account of somebody talking to people who, if the narrative is false, would have to be liars, right? The former official wrote that he continued with his efforts when he was appointed head of Roscosmos in 2018. However, according to Rogozin, no evidence was presented to him. Instead, several unnamed academics angrily criticized him for undermining the sacred cooperation with NASA, he claimed. The former Roscosmos chief also said that he had received an angry phone call from a top-ranking official who supposedly accused him of complicating international relations. Rogozin concluded by saying he still cannot believe that the U.S. was able to pull off the feat, but is now unable to, despite the incredible progress in technology since the 1960s. What he claims to have found out, however, was that Washington has its people in the Russian establishment, which we know is a fact. I mean, the Washington was controlling the Russian establishment throughout, from the Yeltsin, throughout the Yeltsin years, until Putin took over and managed to, start clearing them out. And so, I thought it was really intriguing that this guy just exploded the last good argument for the idea that the moon landings actually took place as claimed. Now on a broader level, the reason that I now believe it's a complete, total, and utter hoax is that the way that people defend all of these various issues, the way that they are constantly, trying to shoot down all these various things, is very, very similar to when a theory has been more or less disproved, and now we're into the epicycles section of the life and death of a theory. The way that it's defended matters too. Justin R. has what is possibly, no offense, but this is possibly the dumbest question you can ever ask of anyone ever. But why would they lie? There are a million different reasons that people lie. Some people lie for fun. Some people lie because there's their self-interest. Here's why they would lie. Because they were getting paid $58 million a day. Sorry, $54 million a day to not go to the moon. You don't think that $54 million a day is sufficient reason to lie? There's the whole reason that they've Justin says, I was giving the standard question I've gotten. Yes, it's a retarded question. The correct answer to that is, why does anyone lie about anything? There's a million different reasons. In this case, there's 54 million different reasons per day. I mean, why would a woman lie about who she was out with when she's having an affair? What would you think of a man who's told that his wife wasn't where she was supposed to be, and he says, "But why would she lie?" Well, why do you think? Of course she lied. And then, of course, you've got the sociopaths because they can. Inquisitor Bear says, I love the argument, but so many engineers worked on it. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But it is quite, that's not a rational argument. Just because lots and lots of people worked on something doesn't mean they have any idea what they're working on. And the whole nuclear program, which is a whole nother issue, which we're not going to get into, except for to say, there were tens of thousands of people working on the nuclear program, and they managed to keep that secret. So that's also, but here's the point. Whenever you have people coming up with these stupid defenses and retarded justifications, the narrative is false. That is not how people behave when things are true. That is how people behave when they are trying to defend that which is false. Look at the evolutionists, the way they suddenly lose the ability to do basic math and to answer a simple question like, what is the average rate of evolution? They're like, what? Huh? What are you talking about? This is like elementary school problem solving. X amount of time, Y number of changes, a rate exists. A rate has to exist. Like, well, we never even thought about that. Well, because you didn't want to. You didn't dare. Do you think prominent figures that are obviously in positions to know these hoaxes are MK Ultra or actually have power? Well, first of all, he said like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson is in a position to know anything. I think that you forget how retarded most people are, and also how little people who are intelligent enough to know better think about it at all. Why would a smart person, a smart physicist, spend any time thinking about some historical event that supposedly took place decades ago? You have to have a fundamentally skeptical nature, or you have to have learned to be skeptical because you've encountered too many lies to even think about doubting it. Eventually you get to the point like me where you just say, you know what, it's all fake and gay. All of it is total. I mean, at this point, nothing would surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest to find out that 500 years were added to the medieval calendar. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest to find out that there's crazy alien hijinks going on in Antarctica. I don't believe that the Earth is flat, but it wouldn't surprise me because there are so many lies being told about everything. Einstein being the smartest guy alive, it's a lie. You know, Jordan Peterson being the leading public intellectual in the world, it's a lie. All of it is lies. And so, yeah, we're back up again. If you have to refresh, try refreshing. Try refreshing. You know, we're still going here apparently, but yeah, it says we're back. So unfortunately, we'll probably have to have I'll probably have to split this into two. I don't think there's a way to merge the two with the streams, but anyhow, you know, it's fascinating. I read so many times about Operation Barbarossa, about the way that the Soviet armies were in complete disarray and all this sort of thing, right? And what's fascinating is to read Zhukov's account, and even though the Germans were making significant gains, it was very clear that the Russian general staff was not panicked at all. You know, the Russians were quite calm about it. You know, they were arguing about whether, in fact, they were so relaxed about it that they thought that they could keep Kiev. They thought that they could defend Kiev. And and Zhukov, as well as one of the generals who was on the spot, were saying, look, we're not going to be able to hold it. We should fall back. And they actually ended up unnecessarily losing a number of troops, a large number of troops, because the Supreme Command Staff, as they called it, was excessively optimistic. And then to prove his case, which was fascinating, Zhukov looked up the German records from that time, books written by German officers right after the war, and showed that they were getting concerned about their relatively slow progress and the much heavier level of resistance from the Soviet forces than they had previously experienced in France and in Poland. You know, I mean, these are actual accounts written by the Germans who are getting worried as early as the fourth day after Operation Barbarossa began. This is wildly different than the narrative that we normally hear about how, you know, the Nazis just carved their way across Russia and were at the gates of Moscow, and you know, it's just totally, and you know, and Stalin was panicked and raging and all this sort of thing, and what it demonstrates is that you shouldn't pay. Yeah, that was Ukraine is winning before Ukraine is winning, right? I mean, imagine what they would have said if the modern media were covering Napoleon's invasion of Russia. You know, Napoleon actually took Moscow. He actually occupied Moscow. And it did him no good whatsoever. And the Grand Retreat was one of the most brutal military movements, prior to the Bataan Death March. And so I think that we have no choice but to assume that the official story, whatever the official story is definitely false in some regards and may be entirely false. Like I said, there's so many issues and problems, and yeah, they admit that they filmed a fake landing in case they needed to show it. All this stuff with Kubrick. Oh, I have absolutely no doubt that the Kubrick theory is true. There's already enough evidence that that is the only, not the only, but that is a very rational conclusion at this point. So, anyhow, apply reason, apply logic to it. Don't get caught up in the emotions of it. It doesn't matter what you believed before. Dan says the post-Apollo 11 press conference was what convinced me it was fake. Yeah, that I mean, but there's so many things. It's basically everything that happened. Practically everything that you examine, it becomes completely obvious that the official narrative is totally and utterly false. And you can look at the technical side. You can look at the the behavior of the people before, during, and afterwards, etc., etc. But ultimately, if you just look at the human side of it, all of the behavior surrounding it is fundamentally in line with people who are attempting to deceive and people who know they have deceived. So, anyhow, that's all I've got for tonight. We'll probably discuss this in more detail at some point in time. I have no doubt that there's some folks who are find this very difficult to believe, and that's fine. Again, I don't think it matters that much. I do suspect, however, as I mentioned on the blog, that this is not the last Western hoax that the Russians are going to expose. So I think we've got some very interesting experiences and hopefully informative educations coming in the near future. I'm Vox Day, and this is The Dark Stream.